Welcome to Edenhoven County. I'm Kim, and we are on week 23. We're almost done for the year. And let's go to our books. Do you have them? If you do, give them a wiggle. We're going to go directly to our Bible, so why don't you read it along with me? Luke, who was a doctor and who was a disciple of Jesus, said that these were Jesus' words. And Luke was very attentive to Jesus. He listened to what Jesus said, so he really listened. And he wrote down exactly what he said. And so these were Jesus' words. And he said, "But I tell you who hear me, love your enemies, do good for those who hate you, bless those who curse you, and pray for those who mistreat you." So Jesus is saying, don't seek revenge. Don't try to get them back. What did we learn earlier this year? Didn't we learn vengeance is for the Lord, that the Lord will take care of things if we let him? If we let go, God will take care of things. And so Jesus is saying this in another way. He's saying, bless those who do poorly to you. And so right here in our Bible part, right here, let's think about what we've learned lately in history. We've learned that the Civil War, the war between the Union in the North, the Confederates in the South, and the Union, the Northerners, won the war, that it had finally ended with the surrender of Robert E. Lee to Ulysses S. Grant at the Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia, home of the McLeans. And so that war had ended, and there were a couple of battles after that, but the war had officially ended at that point. And Abraham Lincoln had been killed at Ford's Theater. So remember, all these points in history had happened. And now Johnson was the president, and he wanted all of the northern and the southern states to come back together in the Union as part of the United States. And so what he did was he sent down people to help the Southerners. So think about the things that had been destroyed during this Civil War. Remember Sherman's March to the Sea? They destroyed railroads. They destroyed many houses. They destroyed barns if the people resisted. There was a lot of destruction that went on. And so the Northerners sent down people to try to repair some of that and help the Southerners start again. And then we'll learn in our history part that there were people called carpetbaggers, and they came down to take advantage of the Southerners from the North. So in here, I want you to maybe do like a Civil War thing of Northerners coming down to help the Southerners, because remember, just the year before, they had been enemies willing to kill each other. But God says, what does God say? He says, for those of you who are listening, love your enemies, do good for those who hate you, bless those who curse you, and pray for those who mistreat you. So think about that. If they had continued, if the Northerners had continued to be mean or to be hateful toward the Southerners, we would have never come back as a union. But by being kind and giving to them, we were able to reunify as a nation, just as Jesus said. So I want you to depict something about that. Next is Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington was one of the foremost African American leaders in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and he founded the Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute in Alabama. So he was a really cool guy, and we're going to learn about him in our timeline cards. And then types of clouds. I want you to go outside real quick and look up at the sky and tell me the types of clouds that are in your sky today. And the types of clouds are cirrus, cirrostratus, altostratus, altocumulus, cumulus, stratus, and stratocumulus. And those are some types of clouds. And we're going to learn about them in science this week. And finally, geysers. Who knows what a geyser looks like? Are hot springs with constrictions in their plumbing. So hot molten lava under the surface, it's near the surface, and it heats up water. And so the outside temperature can be snowy and freezing and cold, but there can be pools of water that are bubbly and hot, and they're called hot springs. But when those bubbly and hot water pools that would normally just float to the surface as bubbly hot water, when those are constricted by land, they can't get up, and so they build a lot of pressure. And remember, wind blows from high to low pressure, so it's high pressure and it's going to blow into low pressure, and so it goes like that, and then it goes down, and then it stays until that pressure builds again, and then what does it do? It goes like that, and then it settles down, and then it waits for that high pressure to build, and then poof. And so Old Faithful is one of the most famous geyser, and that's in Yellowstone National Park. That's pretty cool, isn't it? So we learned about geysers. So here we have Allison, who's in Oklahoma, and we have beautiful, beautiful Lily, who lives in Virginia. And it says, Jesus tells us to love our enemies and do good for those who hate us. Booker T. Washington tried to love his enemies by conversing with white people to improve the plight, to improve the situation of former slaves. Unfortunately, this angered many who thought he was being too kind or gracious and forgiving. Sometimes doing good raises the ire of others. So what does that mean? It means that sometimes when you do what God says to do, it makes other people frustrated or mad with you. But does that mean you should stop? No. God wants us to continue doing the things that he tells us to do. So here it says, how can you be so dependent on God that you're independent of the world? I want you to talk to your mom about that, because that's an important one for this week. So next we have George Washington Carver. He shares a name with Booker T. Washington. They both have Washington in their name. Do you know who they could have been named after maybe? Did you say George Washington? You're so smart. You are so smart. So George Washington Carver was born into slavery, and he was enslaved until he was 9 years old. And he was also homeschooled by his mom, and then he was homeschooled some more until he was 13 years old, and he became the first African-American person. So he lived before the Civil War, and he lived after the Civil War. And after the Civil War, he attended and graduated from Iowa State University, and his degree was in agriculture. And he wanted to do good things for African American people. One of the things that African American people could grow in the soil that they received was peanuts. And so he thought, I should make things out of peanuts and figure out how to make peanuts something people can sell more of. So by 1919, he invented over 100 peanut products. He even invented peanut butter, which most of us have eaten. So we're not going to do a peanut experiment because so many people are allergic to peanuts. But I want you to find something common that your mom always uses. So maybe lentils or beans or something like that. And I want you to come up with 3 different things that no one has thought of with something that your mom says you can use in the kitchen. So think really hard about it, and I bet you'll find something neat. Like George Washington Carver mushed up the peanuts to make peanut butter. So maybe you could take something and mush it up and put some spices in it and see if that makes it taste good, something like that. But I want you to draw what you did right here. And if your mom goes, oh my goodness, please don't do that in my kitchen, then that's okay too. Just draw what you think you could make, and then we can discuss that in class too. That's perfectly fine too. Okay, so finally we're going to talk about what George Washington Carver said. He said some really cool things. And he said, be clean on both the inside and the outside. So that means don't be dirty, don't be stinky. Be clean and look presentable on the outside, but on the inside, always be praying to God. Always have God on your mind. What would God want you to do on your mind? And don't be dirty on the inside by thinking things that you shouldn't think. So maybe you could have a person who's like sparkly clean here. Next is lose if necessary without squealing. Now, I'm sure none of you squeal. I'm positive about it. But I have heard other kids, like my own, say things like, that wasn't fair, I didn't know the rules, or he cheated, or I didn't know he was going to be better than me. That's squealing. I'm sure none of you squeal. So he's saying, don't squeal. Squealing is not good. So put down someone who's going, ee, like that, or squealing. Next is win without bragging. Maybe you could just have someone give a handshake as a win without bragging. No one likes to be around someone who's bragging. And George Washington Carver is right that it makes you so much more acceptable to other people when you don't brag. Next is be too brave to lie. That's one of my favorite ones, because really when we lie, we're not telling the truth because we don't want to suffer the consequences for the truth. We don't want to accept that there are consequences to saying what we actually did, so then we lie about it. And so he's saying be brave and be strong and just say that's the truth and not lie about it. And it always works out where the consequences are less if we just tell the truth from the beginning. But sometimes it's hard to do. So I want you to try really hard this week and be too brave to lie. And maybe here you can have someone who's just very brave. The next is be too generous to cheat. So when we cheat at things, we're trying to get something that we really shouldn't be getting. And so we want to be so generous, so dependent on God, that we're just like, something God will provide for me, so I want you to have it. So maybe you want to maybe put a board game here and have both people smiling or something like that. Next is neither look up at the rich or down at the poor. So sometimes when we see very rich people, we think, he must have it all together, or he must be something super special, or she must be so special. But that doesn't mean anything, because sometimes God blesses people with money because they love him and because he wants to. Sometimes he doesn't, but he still loves them. He still adores them so much, and he wants us to have that perspective. He wants us to just adore people, whether they're rich or they're poor, and not because of that in any way. So we're going to do clouds. So if you learn a little bit about clouds, you can get ahead in science this week and fill in there. And otherwise, we'll do it in science. So I look forward to seeing you next week. And you guys are doing such a good job. I'm so proud of you. I'll see you next week.